Okay. I will ask Vice Chair Faith and Commissioners Derry, Fraser, Ledyard, and O'Connor, who were appointed or reappointed at the March 17, 2021 Council, to raise your right hand and repeat after me. I, and state your name,
I,
Andrew Fraser,
do solemnly swear or affirm
solemnly swear or affirm
that I will support the Constitution of the United States
that I will
support the Constitution of the United States
and the Constitution and laws of the State of Arizona,
and the Constitution and laws of the State of Arizona,
that I will bear true faith and allegiance to the same
I will bear true faith and allegiance to the same
and defend them against all enemies,
defend them against all enemies,
foreign and domestic,
foreign and domestic,
and that I will faithfully and impartially
and I will faithfully and impartially
discharge the duties of the office of the Planning and Zoning Commission
discharge the duties of the office of the Planning and Zoning
Commission
to the best of my ability, so help me God, or so I do affirm.
to the best of my abilities. I do affirm.
Okay, that's very good. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Moving on to the second item of business, introduction of new Commissioner Andrew Fraser.
Can everybody hear me? All right. So my name is Andrew Fraser. I have lived in Litchfield Park for about a year and a half. I've been a fan of Litchfield Park for a long time. My wife's family has been here for a long time. So I'm originally from California. We moved back to the state of Arizona, or moved to the state of Arizona in 2012. We lived in Phoenix up until August of 2019. In which point we moved to Litchfield. Like I said, I'd wanted to live here for a long time. I fell in love with Litchfield. You know, the first time I came here, it reminded me of kind of where I grew up. Right now, you know, previously I was a research faculty member at Arizona State University in the Civil Engineering Department. I am currently the district engineer for the Maricopa Water District, which is a primarily an ag district, though we're changing quite a lot on the West Valley. So our district territory is approximately 60 square miles. We stretch roughly from McDowell all the way up to Bell, bounded by probably the 303 in Perryville, although we do, you know, we are on the west side of Perryville. Pretty much anything in the West Valley, with the exception of Litchfield, rests within our district boundaries. So I'm, you know, very familiar with all of the development that's going in and around the 303 corridor. We also, Maricopa Water District, we own and operate Lake Pleasant, the marina at Lake Pleasant. So, you know, if any of you have been up there, that is a Maricopa Water District facility. I'm up and around Lake Pleasant all the time. So I'm very happy to be here and to serve on this commission. You know, this is what I was trained to do, you know, as far as planning and zoning and the civil engineering side of things. So, you know, I'm excited to be here. If any of you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them.
Okay, hearing no questions, we'll go on to the next.
Welcome.
Oh, there you go. Welcome.
Thank you.
Yes, welcome.
Next item is the election of officers, and there will be an action taken on this item. Pam, are you leading this one?
Would anyone like to nominate someone to chair the commission for the 2021-2022 term?
I would nominate David. Now, can you not run? Can the vice president run, or vice chair go again as vice chair? Isn't there something where you can't?
You can only, you can only have 2 consecutive terms as chair or then as vice chair, and then you'd have to either resign or switch to the, like if you were vice chair, you could switch then to be chair if you were nominated or if you were elected.
So in theory,
you
Mike could be nominated to be vice chair again, just so I'm understanding this properly.
Oh, hold on. Yes, he's only served one term as vice chair.
Okay. So sorry, I'll just start out. I would nominate David to be the chair.
Okay, do we have a second?
I'll second it.
You want to comment on that, David?
Nope.
If appointed, I will, if appointed, I would be happy to serve.
Okay, any other nominations? Then I believe Commissioner Ledyard is elected unanimously.
We'll put it to
by
vote.
acclamation.
So all those in favor of electing Commissioner David Ledyard as president, say aye.
Aye.
Okay.
All those opposed? Motion passes.
Okay. And now, do we have any nominations for vice chair?
I'll nominate Mike if he'd like, willing to serve again.
I would do so.
Okay,
I'll
Second,
second
do we
it.
have a second?
All right, all those in favor?
Aye.
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 Any against? Motion carries. Pam, are there any other officers we have to elect? Is it just chair and vice chair?
Just chair and vice chair, but then those are the officers, but the next item on the agenda would be to appoint someone to be the commission representative on the Design Review Board and Board of Adjustment.
Okay. We'll move on to the next item of business. David, do you want to take over the meeting from here, or I can finish it out? Your call.
Why don't you go ahead and finish it out? That's fine.
Very well. All right. Next item of business is to appointment of a representative to the Design Review Board of Adjustments. I know Mr. O'Connor, Commissioner O'Connor, has been serving that role. I'll go ahead and nominate him to continue.
I will second that.
Any discussion, especially from the guy we just nominated?
Yeah, I'm happy to do it. I enjoy it, and I feel like I bring a lot of value to it. So I'm happy to continue to serve on the, and be the liaison for the group.
Great. We'll go ahead and vote. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any against? Motion carries. Go on to the next item here,
Vice Chair, may I ask something real quick?
please.
It'd be interesting to know if anybody in the group does have any interest in serving on those in the future. I don't want to totally dominate. So if there was someone else that, I know it's another year, but does anybody else have interest in the future based? Bob, you do? Okay.
What exactly do you do as a representative?
Well, you would basically, you're on the design review board. So
Okay.
you serve on the board, on the commission, and they just have one person from P&Z on that.
Oh, okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense.
Okay, we'll move on to the next item. Set meeting schedule. Pam, what's our options here?
Well, since we're meeting virtually, I suppose we could choose a different night of the week. However, once we go back to meeting publicly, we will be meeting back in the library once again, and they have limited us to the second Tuesday of the month. That's the only night they had available. My suggestion would be to keep meeting on the same second Tuesday of the month at 7 p.m. And then perhaps in the future, if something changes, when we get back into meeting publicly in the library, we could always redo the vote. We could change the date, that day we meet.
I'll move to keep the meetings on the second Tuesday of the month.
I'll second.
All those in favor?
Um,
Aye.
Aye.
Any against? All right, motion passes. On to F, zoning code update. Mr. Sinks, is this one you?
Yes, thank you. I guess acting chair, Faith. I think I've got that right after the housekeeping items that we made it through tonight. So Pam and I were encouraged by the spirited discussion that we had with both yourself and Commissioner O'Connor as part of the P&Z working group that's just now reconvening after kind of a brief break, due to COVID and also due to staff's dedication of time and resources to the large Sun Health rezoning project that took over the third and portion of fourth quarter of last year. I have a brief PowerPoint today to discuss. We want to kind of discuss one specific topic. As we get through the zoning code, the great majority of the code rewrite is looking at restructuring and reorganization so that it's a easier to use document. It's more concise, but there are going to be some possibilities for material development standard or use right changes included in the code. So Pam and I have focused exclusively on more of the land use and general provisions portions of the code. And when I say land use, I'm talking about each of the zoning districts and the allowed uses in the land use matrix. And then what we call section 31, which is the current code, is called general provisions. And that's where it's kind of the catch-all, if you will, in regards to how do we regulate fences and walls and lighting and many other ancillary items that don't apply to really just one zoning district in particular. Otherwise, we would have provisions in that exact zoning district. General provisions applies across the code and could possibly apply to all or portions of several zoning districts. And so after our working group lunch, as we're working through section 31 as a group, remember staff and that's primarily Pam and I are doing technical reviews in advance, generally meeting with the commissioners as a working group lunch where we meet the first Wednesday now of the month. And we just met last Wednesday on the 7th. And a couple items that have come up in the past couple of years has been, again, a focus on what we call accessory structures within the park. And these are people that are primarily, obviously, on residential lots that have an interest in accessory structures, whether it's a little storage shed that you buy at Home Depot, or it's a guest house, it's a pool cabana, it's a shade ramada. We've had people ask us, can I build an RV garage in my backyard? Can I build a guest house with a kitchen for my mother-in-law / adult children / whatever. And so we had an interesting discussion. So if you don't mind, I'm going to go ahead and share screen to a PowerPoint and then go through the highlights of the code section of 31. If you want to get in the details, you're welcome to click online and read all of the nitty-gritty details of the development standards. But I wanted to just kind of Cliff's notes it so we could have a little discussion tonight to get further direction as we look at possibly making it changes to the text. So I'm going to go to the PowerPoint and just give me one moment so that I know it shares, and then I'm going to do it in screen mode. So give me 1 second. So it should be full screen. Can you guys see it?
Yes.
Perfect. All right. So this is obviously just the first slide. Zoning code with the focus on accessory structures. Just to make it clear, we're not trying to cover section 31 of the code tonight. That's 17 pages of the numerous items. Really want to talk about what are your, as commissioners, your thoughts on the community. Not trying to lead the discussion in any one direction or another, but rather that just gather your thoughts and your experiences as we look at possibly making changes to the actual code, not just making it look prettier and be more organized. So the recap for accessory structures, and this is something to think about, is that accessory structures are considered detached structures. That means you usually have a primary residence on a lot, let's say a residential lot, and you want to have an accessory structure. It could be habitable or uninhabitable. It could be a storage shed that you can, throw your golf cart and your lawnmower in, or it could be a detached garage, right? You want to put another garage in your backyard. It could be a workshop, or you could have a pool cabana. Or you could have livable space in there. It could have a bedroom and a little living room, and perhaps even as much as a kitchenette. And when I say kitchenette, I mean like, a toaster oven, microwave, and a little fridge. It needs to be located between the rear yard, which is the rear property line, and the principal structure. There is a current maximum height provision of 15 feet in height, or the maximum height of the actual primary residence, whichever is lower. Usually it's 15 feet. Usually the primary residence is at least 15 feet tall. The big one that we've encountered lately is a maximum of 500 square feet under roof. We get a lot of requests for accessory structures, accessory buildings at 500 or over 500 square feet. There's a reason that 500 square feet was put in the code approximately 14 years ago. There are requirements that you can't lease or rent that space, like a secondary dwelling unit. For example, if you have a guest house that you don't like, put it in, Craigslist and rent it out for X dollars per month indefinitely. But of course, except for Airbnb, there are statutory requirements that require the city to allow Airbnb to occur within certain provisions. Accessory structures can have their own separate utility meters. Again, this is another clause that helps protect us from having more or less a second home on a single family lot. And we do require the architecture to match the primary residence. So I hope this kind of gives you a little bit of the recap of, which is basically a page and a half of text in the code. So as a reminder, accessory structures have different setback provisions than the primary residence. So, like, let's say a primary residence needs to have a 25 or 30 foot front yard, 30 foot rear yard, 10 or 15 foot side yards. Accessory structures are in the back, and they can be closer to the property line, as close as 5 feet in some, in some cases. So the goal is that the intention of the accessory structure provision is, to accommodate the way people live, to allow setbacks that are somewhat more permissive than the primary structure, but that they're intended to be smaller structures with limited uses. That's where we've been. These are the accessory structure provisions that are generally found throughout most cities, although Litchfield Park is unique in that we not only require that the maximum square footage remain at or under 500 square feet. We don't require it to be 500 square feet. I should say we can't allow anything over 500 square feet. But that it's also subject to maximum lot coverage for the entire lot. So in the case where you may have a smaller lot residence and they want to do an accessory structure, those are cases where you may encounter the possibility of meeting the maximum lot coverage of, let's say, 40% of a lot. 40% of a 6,000 square foot lot is, just 2,400 square feet in a roof. So in any case, I just wanted to go over, those are the details of accessory structures in our code. And I wanted to show you some examples of real life applications that we've had here at the city. I know Commissioner O'Connor serves on the design review board, so he's seen several of these over the past year. And we've discussed we discussed them over our luncheon, and I'll show you kind of some ideas of what's been approved. Here's a casita example, where we looked at, it's kind of like a baby garage with a workshop. The design review board approved this as recently as this December. It was at just under 500 square feet. You can see that they elevated the home. They elevated the casita to match general ideas of the home. You can kind of see like the roof lines match. They're going to do the slump block to match. So the idea was architecture matches. It looks like it makes sense on the property and it complements the property, and it doesn't look or appear as a kind of a prefab or some sort of an add-on that doesn't feel fully integrated with the lot. So this was approved in December. So this is a elevation view of what that facility or what that building looks like. Another casita example, Design Review Board approved back in September 2021. I wanted to show you what it looks like in plan view. So you can see this is a relatively irregularly shaped lot. There were numerous additions requested as part of this request for the Design Review Board. But if you look up in the top right corner, you'll see in the blue, that's all the blue is what was new. But that blue is detached, so that was an accessory structure. And in the case of that accessory structure, they initially wanted to go a little bit larger than 500 square feet and have a porch on it, but it was eventually, we kept it at 500 square feet under roof, which is how the code is interpreted now. So if I want to have a porch on my little casita, that porch, if it's covered, is included in the 500 square feet, so that we don't have this semblance of overbuilding the lot or having a giant covered porch on a 500 square foot casita, so where you end up having maybe 700 square feet under roof, for example. So that's the way the code is written. And this was also discussed at the luncheon, you know, are we good with the 500 square foot maximum? This is another example, very simple example of a detached rear covered patio. It doesn't have to be an enclosed livable space. It doesn't have to be a garage. It can be an open ramada. So you can see they match the block columns, and the roof line on this particular structure matched the generalized roof line of the home. Same kind of like roof tile, trim elements, and column materials. So this was approved back in June of 2021. As we discuss these conversations, what always seems to come up is, you know, what happens with our residents that have recreational vehicles? The recreational vehicles currently cannot be parked on a lot if it's not fully screened. And by their nature, they generally are so large and so tall, they can't be screened by a 6-foot block wall in the rear yard. So people, one, can't park them on their lot because they can't be fully screened. And two, oftentimes don't want them out in the sun exposed to the elements anyways, because they can be quite expensive and they want them protected and parked indoors. So really right now at this time, the only way to have an RV garage is to have an attached RV garage. So it has to be attached to the main structure. And the Design Review Board has been quite careful to try to get the mass and scale of an RV garage by its nature to blend in with homes in the park. And a lot of homes in the park are restricted to single levels. So how do you get an RV garage, which is large, to blend in with kind of almost a ranch style or mid-century modern sort of home in the park? In this case, what you're looking at here, this was ultimately approved, but the roof line of that RV garage, which you can see on the left, was lowered a couple feet so that it wouldn't exceed the overall ridge line of the house. So the board went back and forth and negotiated with the homeowner and the contractor to actually reduce the size of this RV garage. So as we go through the code rewrite, the question becomes, do we keep it as is? Or do we want to make any modifications based on changes in the changes in land use needs of the city? You know, staff has worked to protect the code. I wouldn't say protect the code. We maintain the code and understand. Pam understands too the history of the code and where we got to. And the concern was, and as we've seen in other cities where we don't have restrictions on accessory buildings, that there's a tendency at times, sometimes people will build very, very large accessory structures in the rear yard, which may come as a surprise and an unpleasant surprise even to someone's neighbor. You know, we considered at our luncheon, would we want to open up the code a bit and allow larger than 500 square feet and say, you know what, every residential zoning district has a maximum lot coverage. Maybe we allow larger accessory buildings and just keep within the overall maximum lot coverage so we don't overbuild the lot. That's one way to look at it, and that's how some cities approach it, which it's a bit more lax than what we currently do. We also talked about considering allowing larger square footages on larger lots only. Like, you know, we have a lot of 1 acre properties in the city where an accessory building, you know, based on scale of the property size has perhaps a more minimal impact on the general vicinity because it's simply smaller in scale to the overall property size, right? In a large lot neighborhood. We said, well, if we considered large allowances, maybe we should also consider that we vary the minimum setbacks from the property line based on building height. So let's say we did allow larger structures. Well, maybe we should set back those structures, 1 foot for every building height, which is another common procedure done in other cities where, let's say, I want to build something that's 15 feet tall. It's 1,000 square feet. Well, then we require it to be set back 15 feet from the property line because we do a 1-to-1, 1 foot setback to 1 foot building height. Now, this again is just throwing out examples of the way development standards can be evaluated and have been in other jurisdictions. That doesn't necessarily mean that the commission or council or the citizenry will concur with that. We also,
Excuse me, Jason, I'm not sure if you know, we have that step back already, but only up to the height of 15 feet.
right,
So at 10 feet, you can be 5 feet away. At 11 feet height, you have to be 6 feet away. At 11 to 12 feet, you have to be 7 feet, and so forth, up to the 15 feet, at which
Right.
point you're 10 feet away. Okay, I wasn't sure.
oh, I'm sorry. I should have clarified that in the jurisdictions that I'm referring to as a specific example, it oftentimes will be a 1-to-1. So by the time you get to 15 feet, you're actually at a 15-foot setback for an accessory building. So I apologize for not clarifying that scaling. But that's one way to address it if you're considering the impact of an accessory building, which would be in the rear of the property, kind of looming next to the neighbor's property. Could we mitigate that by setting it back further from the property line so it doesn't feel like it's overwhelming the adjacent property owner? Another item we considered was simply exempting size of an accessory building of its own nature that is a detached structure if it's just within the main building setback. So if you meet your front, rear, and side setbacks for the structure, do we even consider it an accessory structure if it's in the main building setbacks? That means you've already met the side and rear property line requirements and the front property line requirements of the main building. And when you get into some really unique architectural applications, an architect can come up with kind of almost a modular home concept where there's an inner courtyard and there can be actually 2 buildings that are separate from one another that constitute really one home. We've seen that before. Rather than kind of what we've seen in the past, we've had to kind of connect, 2 separate buildings with a trellis or some other odd roof structure just to say, okay, they're connected. It's really not an accessory building anymore. We've kind of had to do some workarounds to meet the code requirements. Do we care as long as it's in the main building setbacks? And if that doesn't, if that's not clear, I can try to elaborate further. But it's kind of a catch in our code that we've got right now that we have to actually connect 2 separate structures, even in the main building setbacks, if they're not attached. We want to make sure that we keep matching architecture in the code. I've heard that again, clearly we want to make sure that everything looks integrated. The biggest item that comes up that we think is probably the most controversial is if we consider larger accessory structures, does that lend us towards consideration of detached RV and toy garages, which can be very, very large structures, 2,000 square feet sometimes, maybe even larger if you've got trailers and toys and ATVs and boats and historic vehicles and all that kind of stuff. We start to get into a realm where clearly if you have one of those coach size RVs and you've got a trailer and a boat and a couple ATVs, you will certainly can't build one detached in the city of Litchfield Park because that would be far in excess of the 500 square foot maximum that we currently have. That means if you have that kind of a vehicle, you either figure out how to attach an RV garage to your existing home and make it look right, or 2, you find a location off-site where you store RVs, like many people do. So it's going to be considered a relatively controversial item, and it was controversial 13, 14 years ago, and it may continue to be. And the council was very concerned about odd size, oversized accessory buildings and people parking RVs on their property. It's convenient for the people that own it, but there was concern for the way the park looks and maintaining the look of the park in its historic form and not making it appear to become slowly over time overbuilt with all of these kind of accessory type buildings. We also talked about protection of neighbors' privacy and property rights. I want something like a larger building, but is that impeding your neighbor's privacy and their property rights to kind of an open space feeling in their own backyard? What if they have a gorgeous pool and backyard and they recreate back there and then now all of a sudden there's this giant, accessory building that they have to look at and that upsets them, for example. And then also in general, that leads to item 8 is just the protection of generalized neighborhood open space and view corridors within the community. There's already restrictions if you have view fencing and you're on a golf course, but just in general, just view corridors and that feeling of having a big open backyard and really still being able to see over the 6-foot wall and across and having a feeling that Litchfield Park does of not being a very densely built community. So as urbanization around us continues, as the city of Phoenix grows, as urbanization and densification occurs, as we rewrite codes, it's often this issue that comes up is, do we allow densification and urbanization to creep into our code by allowing these types of things to occur? Or do we say, no, we want to keep it the way it is, don't touch the code? So with that, that's my kind of long, I meant to be shorter on my introduction to all that, but I kind of wanted to be clear where we're coming from. We'd like to get feedback from the full commission, and obviously further feedback, of course, from Commissioners O'Connor and Vice Chair Faith, in an open forum discussion as we look at possibly changing the text of the code. So, and with that, I'll wrap up my presentation. I can pan back and forth on the slides, or I can close the PowerPoint, however the chair or vice chair would like to engage discussion with the commission.
Thank you, Jason. So this was an issue that we spent some time on in the last committee meeting, Brian and I and Jason and Pam. So I think we're all looking forward to some comments by the commission today. I think for Brian and I, it was I guess a little surprising. We didn't know that this was in the code, so it took us by surprise. So please, Commissioner Lawrence, I see your hand up. Go ahead.
Yes, I was wondering if Mr. Sainz could address, or one of the others, exactly how it works for number 7. How do you notify the neighbors that you're planning to put a structure in the backyard? Do you need to get them to sign off on it? Do you invite them to a meeting? I know what would be good neighbor approach, but what is the city's approach to that to protect the neighbor's privacy, property rights, and all?
Well, Pam, would you like me to address that, or would you prefer to? I don't mind. I can address it. It's right now, as the code is written, in the absence of requesting or needing a variance of sorts for setbacks, this sort of an item would really only end up on a design review board agenda. There are no required notifications for development rights that are already existing for each and every property owner in the city. So for those that want to keep within their property rights, their only requirement would be if they meet what's in the code, let me click back to my first slide, don't get dizzy, sorry. But if you meet these requirements, you can simply go to the design review board, make sure it gets their blessing and meets the intent of the code. And then after that, you would pull a building permit. You are not required to get approval or blessing from your neighbor. Now, in many cases, not to confuse the commission, but you'll hear about people getting notices, but oftentimes it's because somebody wants to build closer to a property line than they're allowed to. So they are requesting a variance of sorts. And then in that case, because that's a completely different application and it's related to the Board of Adjustment, there is a notification procedure. So that said, if you meet the requirements you see on the left side under accessory structures and the rest that's in the code, you do not need to notify your neighbors at this time.
I should say too, that some of the structures would not even go to the design review board because the design review board has authorized staff to review those administratively. So they would just come in for staff review and approval, then go in for the building permit, and then they could be built. So there, you're right, there is no notification to the neighbor.
It refers to protection of neighbors' privacy, but who's providing the protection?
If I may, to the chair, Commissioner Lawrence, the context of what I put in the PowerPoint was if we open up the code and to allow additional development rights to, let's say, residential districts in regards to accessory structures, let's say we allow them to go larger, one of the first things we consider is the protection and the privacy of your neighbors. So that's the consideration, like the trade-off, if you will, by saying, okay, if we go from 500 and we say we'll allow 1,000 square foot guest houses in the backyard, is that impeding on your neighbor's property rights? And that was the context of the discussion regarding privacy and protection. So that's kind of like I don't know how to, I guess you can see me in video where I'm like, it's like a balance of, okay, so we're getting the pressures, property values are going up, people have a lot of equity in their homes, they want to do more with their property. It's not atypical for cities as they age to have pressures for densification. Litchfield Park is not an exception. We get these requests a lot. Sometimes people want to build these so they can make Airbnbs out of them, you know? Could they do it, you know, if they got 1,000 square feet, you could do a really nice big 2-bedroom Airbnb in the backyard. You know, those are the sorts of things that are kind of running in the currents in the community. And our question is to you as a commission is, I shouldn't say are you concerned with it, but what are your thoughts on leaving what we have in place? Or do you believe that we should open up anything or actually make anything more restrictive?
More restricted.
Okay.
Please. I live in an area that's had a lot of setback issues in the last few years, I guess I should say. And before I get into all of that, can you clarify view corridors too? Because like there could be a person who lives on the golf course and they have a view fence, and then the neighbor next to them also has a view fence, and the neighbor next to him also has a view fence. And so like the fourth house down has a view of the golf course. And then the person who bought the property on the golf course wants to build a pool cabana.
Right.
And when that's built, all of the other people down the line, their view of the golf course is gone.
Right. And
So,
there are restrictions in place actually for lots that are bound by view fencing already. So they actually have less development rights than typical lots where you would have solid block walls without backing to the golf course. So there's already a restriction in place to keep from impeding those view corridors, because the concept there is that you're all really sharing and your golf course coastline, if you will. You know what I mean? That's your view.
exactly.
That's your view shed. There's a value to that, an intrinsic value to your view corridor that's protected already when you have view fencing. That really would be another subject actually to talk about, is whether the door opens on allowing these sorts of buildings on view lots. This is really more applying to lots where it's generally these accessory structures would be allowed already. They're not really allowed on the view lots as it is.
well, I'm pretty sure design review is going to get a case coming before.
They are going to.
Related to that, because they're talking about it right now.
Yeah, they would need a variance. They would need a variance to allow accessory structure on a lot that's in one of the view lots. And I'm not certain. You know, it's a separate subject. It's not on the agenda. I'm sure Chairman Ledyard would stop me in my sentence if I bring it up, because it's starting to trend into a different subject.
Okay.
But no, it's fine. It's natural for us to try to talk about all of the what ifs. And when I'm looking down, by the way, I'm actually writing notes, just so you know. So I'm trying to keep, and I know Pam is as well. Because I'm hearing concerns about maybe making things more restrictive rather than more permissive, which,
Well, that would be my desire, but I don't know
Okay.
how everyone else feels about that.
okay.
But I mean,
Can we-
my other concern too is it's like all of these things are supposedly located in the rear yard. What about the side yard? I mean, there's a lot of lots that are large enough to have things that are in the side yard, which also can cause problems for the neighbors who are next to them as well.
Well, if you look, you can be 5 feet from the property line and 10 feet from the principal building. So you're correct. These accessory structures could be up to, well, depending on their height, can be close to the side property line if they're behind the principal building. You can
Yeah.
see that on the
If-
slide.
if
Pam, I'll let Pam address this. She deals with it all day.
Yeah, if you can put an accessory structure in your side yard, not a tool shed, a habitable accessory structure, like, or a shade structure in your side yard, but it has to comply with the regular setbacks. You don't get the break of the 5 feet from the property line. So if you have a requirement of a 15-foot side yard setback and you want to put that accessory building in there, you have to comply with that 15-foot side yard setback and actually still be 10 feet away from the existing house.
Okay.
So,
I'm thinking in terms of some, pretty large RVs that go well over the fence line, and there may be metallic things on the top of the RV that reflect. And so when people are out by their pools and they get really upset about, the light and not being able to go outside certain times of the day and things along those lines, which I know it sounds that has actually been an occurrence as well. But I mean, I would
Are you
prefer
talking
that we go
about
more restrictive with regard to a lot of these issues. And I mean, that's just because I think that when you start taking up property, a yard with a lot of RVs and pool cabanas and storage units and things along those lines, for one thing, I think it kind of makes the property look sort of crammed in there and less open, as we had discussed. But in addition, I think it almost makes the property look a little bit less dignified to some degree.
Okay.
And that is just my opinion, obviously. But I mean, I would have a lot of concerns with the height and going above fence lines and what can be viewed by neighbors in the surrounding area and what can be viewed from the street. Even if it is in the back, it could be in a position where as people drive down the street, they still see a huge, structure in the backyard and things along those lines.
Thank you for that. I know Commissioner O'Connor's had his hand up. Why don't we let him jump in here?
Thank you. So a couple of comments I want to make is first, I think on the Airbnb, for lack of a better word, narrative, or I think it's speculative. So if and when we can have data points that we have people in the community that have tried to Airbnb accessory units, I think it's kind of
Right.
unfair to make that statement. I think it's speculative. So that's just quick quick comment on that. My argument, or what I'm thinking on this, is I don't look at this as, hey, should we make this more restrictive or more permissive, or do we expand it? I feel like we have to make it equitable. And I think that we have some large lots that my perspective is if you're in the confines of your lot coverage, why wouldn't we allow them to enjoy their property, quiet enjoyment of their property with a larger accessory unit? So I think the point that I'd like to see is we have these safe measures that, yeah, we don't want 1,000 square foot accessory unit on a 5,000 square foot lot. Like we have to just create those safe measures that's not doable. So, but I also I want us to see, I see that we should make it more equitable for some of these larger lots.
Okay. Understood. Proportionally speaking, what I'm hearing from you, Commissioner O'Connor, is that smaller lots have virtually, by nature of them being smaller, have more development rights potentially than a large lot. Because the scale is off. I got you.
I
Right.
think so. I am curious, Jason, do you know how that 500 square foot number, I mean, it seems arbitrary to me. Like, do you know how that?
Well, it does that number, Commissioner O'Connor, to the chair, Commissioner O'Connor, that number does predate me. I think the 500 square foot was something that I don't know how that number rounded to. Pam, do you recall in the previous code rewrite how they got the 500, if there was a particular trigger that they were concerned about, or did they just pick that number and say that's small enough or big enough?
There was a lot of discussion. In fact, the first time they revised the requirements for accessory structures, they did allow a larger sized unit. And of course, well, not of course, but someone built a very large unit in their backyard that was thought that it looked like a second home on the property. And so they went back and amended the code to limit it to 500 square feet. Different sizes were discussed, and they felt that this was a decent size to allow someone to have a small, say, unit in their yard for a family or guest quarters without making it into something very large that would be hurtful to the neighbors or look like a second home on the property.
And also, if I may add for reference, and Commissioner O'Connor, I'm sure you probably know this, 500 square feet is more or less a two-car detached garage. If you were to allow for a 20 foot wide by 25 foot depth, there's some combination therein that gets you to 500 square feet. It's basically a detached two-car garage. So that's a development right that you're given. Anything over that, obviously, you wouldn't be able to do as a detached accessory structure.
Unless you put a trellis in between.
If it's within the main building setbacks and it's connected with the trellis.
That's where I think it gets a little cute with that, but that's just,
I know.
I'm going to mute myself at this point.
We have
But that's not in the backyard, so, that's within the building footprint.
right.
I think the problem comes up that you're allowing something that normally was open, the rear yard, open space, and now you're allowing a structure to go back there. So you have to decide how large of a structure do you feel is, what square footage is enough for that, and what is too much?
If someone has a large lot, they should be able to put more on it. But when you've got these tiny little lots, it's difficult and it looks cramped, I think. But I don't know.
So, Commissioner, if I may, to clarify, I understood before you are concerned about the appearance of overbuilding properties, yet perhaps you're open to the concept of a somewhat larger accessory building if you're on a larger lot. And if I may, larger lot may mean something to different people. A third of an acre could be large to somebody, but I think in Litchfield Park, I think a lot of our larger lots are upwards of an acre.
Exactly. If someone has an acre lot, I wouldn't even be restricted to 500 square feet. If they want to put something larger on that, I think that's fine for them to do that. But when you're taking small pieces of land and you're cramming a lot of buildings onto it, I think that it clutters our city to some degree. We've got too many rooftops that we're looking down at. So if someone's got more property land, I think that would be more equitable.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Oh, no, I was just clarifying that's possible that the code can be written in a way that provisions to exceed 500 square feet, for example, could apply to lots like, let's say, zoning districts that are at least R115 or larger, or even residential estate or R1, size. When you get into the much larger lots, you could perhaps go larger. And we could discuss what that might be.
Commissioner Frazier, I see your hand up.
Yeah, thank you. Obviously, I've got a lot to learn, a lot to catch up on. My question as far as making this more restrictive is, given the existing code, how many issues have come up, where something was built under the existing code in which, community neighbors, anybody down the street have come back to the city council, come to this commission and said, what was built under the existing code, is an eyesore, it's a problem. Do we have reason to make the code more restrictive? Is there anything in the last 10 years or whenever this code was last updated that makes us think that we need to restrict the code more?
There are complaints among residents to the city with regard to structures like trailers that can attach to trucks that are used almost like as construction workshops, as well as RVs, as well as trailers. There, I know in my general area, various neighbors have complained about a couple individuals that live in my section of Litchfield Park with regard to those, excuse me, those issues. And there have been multiple complaints about them. So
Pam, you may
I
want
don't know
clarify.
to the extent.
Pam, you may want to clarify too the difference between lawfully or unlawfully parked trailers versus lawfully permitted structures and any complaints against lawfully permitted building structures.
That's a different subject and a different part of the code. RV structures or trailers parked on lots, that's a different part of the code. What we're referring to here are accessory structures, like a shade structure or like a little casita in the backyard. I mean, an RV garage could be a detached accessory structure, but the actual parking of the RV, that's covered in a different part of the code.
Okay.
And in answer to Commissioner Fraser's question, we have not had a lot of complaints about legally built accessory structures. Unfortunately, we get a lot of structures going up without being built without complying with the zoning code regulations or without permits. And those we do get complaints about because some are built right up to the fence line. Some are not architecturally pleasing. But those that are legally built and comply with the setbacks, I'm not aware of too many. I don't think of any complaints that we've received on those structures.
So within the existing code, it sounds like there's no issues in terms of making it less permissive. It sounds like nobody is fighting against the code, and saying, these things that are permitted under the code should not be allowed. I think I have heard from Commissioner O'Connor that maybe it should be more open to larger lots. I think that's something to certainly talk about. But based on what we've just talked about, I don't see any reason to make it more restrictive, and that there haven't been any complaints. I think 500 square feet is reasonable. I think that does come from a 2-car garage standard. That is kind of where that comes from. I've experienced that before. So again, I have a lot to learn. I'm catching up. So,
Yes.
but
I think Commissioner Fraser, you've got to correct also, if that were to translate into a casita, 500 square feet could be reasonably considered. You could put a 1-bedroom without a full kitchen, and 500 square feet as well. It'd be a very small 1-bedroom, but it could be a 1-bedroom casita or a 2-car garage. It's basically the max you get out of 500 square feet.
Pam, what is the restriction with regard to the kitchen in a casita?
There cannot be a stove in the kitchen.
Okay, so there's no stove. Okay.
No stove and no hookup for a stove. We
Commissioner
found
Warren.
a couple of times people were telling us they weren't putting a stove in, but they put the actual hookup for the stove in. And then when we weren't looking, the stove went in.
Yeah, we try to catch them on the 220, and that's we just so you know, and I know Commissioner O'Connor's familiar with this from the design review board. We do look at the floor plan oftentimes when we get the casita requests, and we make note if we see the floor plan, they show a kitchenette that shows a stove. We tell them the stove needs to come out because it more or less constitutes a secondary dwelling unit, which makes it almost like a duplex or multifamily lot.
Commissioner Lawrence, I saw your hand up again.
Yes, I had just a couple of questions. The word equitable is interesting because equitable could be perceived that everybody gets the same 500 square feet, regardless of the size of their lot. And here's being said, based more on coverage, the coverage on the land. So more land, larger structure. My question is, and then also, I just want to bring up the question about short-term rentals. I live in Litchfield Greens, and we have a restriction of, I believe it has to be 39, at least 1 month, the rental. You can't have short-term by the night rentals here. So I didn't know that if the Litchfield Park has the same, within the park, has any restrictions on that, because I know that's been a source of concern. Scottsdale, Paradise Valley, people that have just had a lot of people coming in and out of their homes. It changes the character of the neighborhood. So if I was going to maybe change something, that would be one thing about short-term rentals. You know, I think the density question that Commissioner Alvey brought up is important. You know, and also RV structures. I mean, you can go to Glendale and Goodyear on either side of us, and we're getting squeezed by the traffic, by the all the things that come with density. You want an RV garage, you can go up behind Bash's and get a lovely property with a huge RV garage, and same in Goodyear. So those are just my concerns. So bottom line, I would not change this. I would just make, you know, if somebody wanted to come in and have a good argument for a variance of some structure, maybe so, you'd listen to it. But I wouldn't make it carte blanche that, you know, hey, if you've got a larger property, you can have a much larger structure. And I guess lastly, can you build more than one 500 square foot structure? Can you do a casita 1 year and then come back the next year and get the shade house, the covered?
Pam, may I address 2 items on that? Or go ahead if you'd like to first, Pam. I know you're going to say about the only one structure up to 500 square feet. Or a combination up to 500.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
And
you could have 250 square foot structures, but they would have to be separated by 10 feet.
And then also further, if I may, Commissioner Lawrence, to the chair, what I'm hearing is that you may be interested in a provision that would allow someone some discretion on this, and you use the term variance, but perhaps, if I may, do you mean use permit, where you would have to make a case that you're not having a negative impact on your neighbor versus having a hardship on the property? It's two different legal questions. And usually in these cases, you would be looking to say, if I want to go over 500 square feet, I need to get a use permit, which in that case would trigger making findings that you're not having a negative impact on the neighborhood, and you have to provide notification to your neighbors, you know, via letter, and they can come to a public hearing with the Board of Adjustment. If that's what I'm hearing as a possibility.
Yeah, I hesitate on that because I know what happens in commercial real estate with variances. You know, you give a little bit more open space, you can build, you know, bigger building, et cetera. There's so many trade-offs. You know, I think that we should be a little bit more clear cut on this and decisive on keeping the policy as it is or allowing it to change. But my opinion is that it should stay at the 500 square foot.
Okay, great. And just so to be clear for the whole commission, anybody could technically apply for a variance to have a larger structure. We've had requests in the past where people have floated the idea past staff, and we have had responses in the initial conversations where we would find it very difficult to make the 4 findings to be able to grant a variance because they're very specific in the statutes. And I know Commissioner and Chair Ledger is familiar with those statutes. It's very difficult to meet those. So we've not had a case that I'm aware of where someone was successful in for even bothering to apply for one. But they could do so. They have the right to ask for one. It just doesn't mean they would get it granted. Okay, I'll leave it
Commissioner
at that.
O'Connor, you have your hand up?
Yeah, I was just gonna say, and again, David could speak this much better than I could, but like basically, so I don't think anybody could get a variance if that's the route we went. So I'm not saying we should make it easy, but I think if we were to employ the variance, basically, I don't see anybody being able to get that based off of them having hit those 4 criteria.
Right. Okay.
Bob or Dave, you have any comments?
Sorry, can I just say one last thing too? We do have something interesting with the RV garage in Litchfield Park where, we do allow it right now. And we've had tough discussions at the design review level of trying to create an aesthetically looking, a nice looking add-on, because people do have the right to do it. We can't say they can't do it, and it's challenging. So it's another interesting conversation to have, because we can't limit them to do it at this point.
If I may,
I also wanted to address, oh, go on, I'm sorry.
I just want to make a quick comment on the variances. Traditionally, at least back in law school, when they talked about a variance, they always used the example of a pie-shaped lot that was usually left at the end of a subdivision, where if you strictly impose the rules, it would make it impossible for the property owner to really enjoy their property. Now, over the last century of dealing with that, lawyers have gotten very creative as to when they come in with their applications, but it still really boils down to, is there something different about this property that makes it reasonable to grant what they want? And where you get into an issue with mature neighborhoods like Litchfield Park, there are neighborhoods in Litchfield, for example, on setbacks that were set back when it was in the county. And then the town came on board, changed it. And then you have some cases where neighbors have had to come in for a variance. But what they're asking to do is maybe the very same thing that exists all up and down the lot. So each of those cases is judged on its own merit. So the whole point of a variance is not getting locked into a particular square footage or whatever. But getting back to the other comments, I kind of like the idea of lot coverage in the sense that if you've got a big lot and you've only used a certain amount of lot coverage, and you could, if you wanted to, add on your house without any trouble, and instead you want to build a casita or a pool house or whatever we're going to call, as long as we keep it down within a reasonable size, then I'm happy with that. And I'm not necessarily happy with the idea of it going back and trying to be more restrictive, because you end up with a bunch of properties that are already built, that already have vested rights, if you will. And then you get these variance applications because of that. So I'd be in favor of, we take what we have and enforce that. And then in those rare cases where it makes sense, we can do a variance.
I'd like to piggyback off that. I think my thoughts after listening to this is when we're talking, there's two different discussions. One is when we're talking about in the setbacks, and when we're talking about not in the setback. And if we're in the setbacks, limiting it to 500 square feet makes sense to me. But when you're inside the setbacks, then I think it switches over to lot coverage, which I would be all for at that point. Any other comments?
Excuse me, Chair, I just wanted to address Commissioner Lawrence's comment about Airbnbs. At one point, the city did not allow any Airbnb rentals. But unfortunately, the state came along and told us we have to allow them. The cities have to allow them. HOAs are allowed to restrict them if they had the rule in place before the law was passed. But the city's hands are tied, and we can't restrict them anymore.
Okay, if there's no other comments on this topic, we'll move on to item G, Design Review Board, Board of Adjustments update. Commissioner O'Connor, I believe, is this your update you provide?
Yeah, Vice Chair, can we just go ahead and utilize the agenda? And if anybody has any questions, feel free to ask, but I'll just let the agenda speak for itself.
That's fine. If anybody has any questions, there's been a page provided to you regarding the updates on the Design Review Board. So if you take a look at that and have any questions, then please feel free to say something. I'll give you a second to look through it, and then we'll go on to the next item. All right. Seeing no questions, we'll go ahead and move on to item number H, topics for referral to the City Council. Pam, would we be able to, or Jason, whoever, would we be able to refer the issue that we were just discussing regarding ancillary uses up to the City Council to see what their opinion is?
Vice Chair Faith, to the chair, I don't see why you couldn't. We could certainly make it a study session item specific to a council agenda. We anticipate there's going to be, this is a hot button item, as well as others in the code rewrite. As soon as you open the box, it's ripe for discussion points, whether it's this or signs, but certainly we could put it on a council agenda for a study session item. I don't see any reason why we couldn't pay them, right? Especially if we're recommended by P&Z.
Right. We can make yes, we can make the referral. It would be up to the mayor or to put it, whether or not to put it on the agenda, but we can certainly make the referral.
Okay. Do I hear anything
We
else?
usually do it by excuse me, Vice Chair, or we usually do it by motion if we want to refer something to the City Council. So if that's something you'd like.
Sure. So also moved. Do we have a second?
I'll second it.
All right. Any discussion? Seeing none, those all in favor? Aye.
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 Any against? Seeing none, motion passes.
Thank you.
Next item of business, the minutes, possible approval of the minutes of March 9th, 2021. Are there any objections to the minutes that anybody noticed? I'll make a motion to approve the minutes of March 9th, 2021. Do I have a second? I see Bob as a second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any against? Hearing none, motion passes. And then next is staff report on current events.
Commissioners, I'll keep it brief. Thank you for all the commentary tonight. The only thing I would add, I know looks like Commissioner Lawrence is in the waiting room. I think she bounced out. Let her back in for a second. I would just add that we anticipate, just a quick update, Dysart and Camelback looks like on next month's agenda, possibly for Design Review Board, we may be looking at a proposed Taco Bell as a new neighbor or new part of our community. So just FYI, we anticipate it next month. We'll see if they get their stuff in time. They had a study session meeting with the board last month, the Design Review Board, so we'll see how that goes. And I think I'll leave it at that. There's other items occurring, but we haven't had any formal applications come in for them, but some big ticket items look like they're on the horizon. So you may see some activity in the near future.
Thank you. Next item, commissioners' reports on current events. Do any commissioners have a report on current events? Seeing none, we'll go on to the next item, adjournment. I'll go ahead and move to adjourn. Is there a second? Bob seconds, it looks like. All those in favor?
Aye.
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 Any against? Hearing none, meeting is adjourned.
Have a good night. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Good night. Thank you.